Hey guys! So today's video is going to be about a small but important collection of do's and don'ts when it comes to installing dread extensions. The very first one, which is also the most important one, is about installing on wet versus dry hair. Do install on dry hair. Do not install on wet hair. Installing on wet hair is super not recommended. I did used to install this way. If you've been around on my channel for a while, then you remember that when I first started doing dreads, I did install on wet hair, until I learned that it can cause discomfort, and more importantly, it can actually cause damage to your hair. This is because when wet hair dries, it tightens. That can cause your hair to snap and break off, and the additional tightness and pulling on your scalp can cause irritation, even as far as tension bumps and headaches. Doing a tight, secure install on wet hair and then having your hair dry and get even tighter on your scalp can cause some pretty serious discomfort. This could cause a range of different discomfort levels. It could be something kind of small as just like a little bit tight, kind of like when your hair is in a high ponytail, or it could be a little bit itchy and sore. You might not be able to sleep because it's too tight and you can't lay on them, it's too much pressure. Or like I said, you could even be getting headaches or tension bumps that actually show up from the stress of pulling on your hair follicles. I definitely remember back when I used to install on wet hair, the first few days being really uncomfortable because as my hair would dry, it would just get even tighter. I just kind of thought that that was normal, that it's just like, oh, it's just me getting used to a bunch of extensions on my head, but in fact it's not, and it was because I was installing improperly. For some people, the tightness might not be that bad, but the real problem is, the real risk is that your hair can actually just snap off in the braids. But with all that said, installing on wet hair generally is easier and can give you a neater and better looking install. So it's not recommended, but it's also personal preference in terms of whether or not you care about the risks. Just like how I bleach my hair into oblivion all the time, and it's super not recommended and definitely on the don't list when it comes to hair care. So really it is up to you whether you want a potentially easier and possibly tighter, neater looking install in exchange for potential damage and discomfort. As long as you know the risks of what you're doing installing on wet hair, then nobody can stop you. Just like how nobody can stop me bleaching my hair. I'm still gonna do it. So even though this is kind of titled a do's and don'ts video, this is a little bit more personal preferences, just because that's kind of how I am as a person. I really hate telling people what to do, because I hate being told what to do. And so this video is actually more like gentle guidelines with some information. That leads me into the next one, which is definitely more personal preference as opposed to a do versus do not, and that is installing on clean versus dirty hair. This one, for the most part, is all about what you're comfortable with. Although clean versus dirty does have some kind of practical uses in it. I've heard a lot of mixed reviews when it comes to clean versus dirty, or even freshly shampooed versus freshly shampooed and conditioned. What I personally do is I try to wash and condition the day before, or sometimes the day of. This is because I like to start with a freshly clean scalp. I like having a fresh start when I have new hair, but then I use conditioner because my hair just really needs it all the time. A lot of people, though, will shampoo but not condition. This is because conditioner can cause your hair to be more slippery and smooth, which can make braiding and installing a little bit more tricky. But others will install on dirty hair to whatever extent they feel comfortable, so whether that's a day, a few days, or more. This is because installing on dirty hair generally tends to be a little bit easier. Hair is generally easier to braid when it's dirty because it's not as slippery and smooth, so you can grip it and it stays together a lot better. As far as I've heard, neither is worse than the other. This definitely isn't a right versus wrong situation when it comes to clean versus dirty, so it's entirely up to you and what you're comfortable with and what you want to do. And so the last thing that I want to touch on, which does kind of relate to clean versus dirty hair, is using a product or not to help you install. So I think this one has the most differing opinions on what is the right way, what you should not do. I personally am pro using a product to help you install. I was not always, though. I actually used to be very against the idea of using products to help with braiding. And that was because I had this kind of gross idea, the idea of having product buildup, of having shit in your hair, and then you put extensions in, and then possibly having it like get into the extensions and just having this kind of like mess on your head. And that was kind of my perception of that without ever trying it myself, without actually seeing what it was like. And so when I say use a product or a braiding facilitator to help you with braiding, so you make your install easier, I do not mean use a bunch of fucking wax on your hair or use a like really heavy pomade. I'm talking more about water-soluble products, water-based products that you don't need a lot of, and that won't give you any type of gross buildup in your hair or in your extensions. So what made me flip my position on this was actually when I stopped installing on wet hair and I started installing on dry hair. And it was really hard for me at first. You can see me do it for the first time, and you can watch me kind of struggle through installing when I did my princess hair about 2 years ago actually. I just had a really tough time switching because installing on wet hair is just so much easier for me, but luckily somebody did see that and they left me a super helpful comment that totally changed my whole position on this. And that person has the YouTube username voightkampf. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I'll write it down in the description as well. So Voight explained it best. I'm actually going to read verbatim this comment from 2 years ago. So Voight said that when they used a braiding facilitator as opposed to nothing at all, their braids stayed neater for longer. There was less bits poking out at weird angles. The dreads stayed tighter and more close to my scalp for the duration of my installs. I didn't have to pull my own or my client's hair as taut when braiding because the product I was using made braiding so much easier all around, and that meant less scalp irritation. And I have definitely come to completely agree with what Voight said. I have less flyaways, my install is neater, it stays neater for longer, it stays close to my scalp for longer. When installing, my sections stay together, braiding is easier, I go a lot faster. But then the most important part that I see is that I can still get the same neat, tight, secure install that I used to get with wet hair, but without the discomfort, without the irritation, without the headaches, and without the damage to my hair. That's like the biggest thing. You guys know me, you know that my real hair is damaged all to hell, and I do not need any extra shit happening to it. And so I have totally flipped the script. I have totally switched to being super fucking pro this product. I cannot install my dreads without it. And so this is what I use. This is my lifesaver product, my favorite product ever. And this is actually what Voight had recommended to me originally. This is Giovanni's Wicked Texture. It is water-based like I talked about. It washes off super easily. It washes out super easily. And it also used to look super fucking pretty. Like, this looks so fucking busted now, but when it was new, it was legit, like, super gorgeous. The reason why it looks like this is because I have taken this with me on every trip that I have, like, gone on since I bought it, and so it has, like, melted and reformed. Try not to form any opinions based off of what this looks like because I have dragged this through the fucking dirt. And so earlier when I was saying that it's important to stay away from kind of waxy, oily stuff and to have something that's like kind of water soluble, and that's because if you are worried about having product buildup like I initially was, this stuff will wash out with your first wash. So that was my main worry, and Voight did talk to me about it a little bit, how if you use the right product and if you use the right amount of it, that it will wash off when you're washing them in your head. And then of course, if there is anything left over at all at the end, then it will definitely come out when you wash the extensions when they're out of your head. And I did want to show you guys how much I do use when installing, because that is really important. If you're using too much product, if there's just too much loaded in there, then it's gonna be messy and uncomfortable and it's gonna feel weird. So what I will do is I'll actually just take the tip of my finger and I'll just kind of like poke it, and then that's what I get. And so with this much, you can kind of see that little bit on my finger. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of like rub it between the tips of my fingers a little bit, and then I'll take my section or my row of hair and I'll just kind of run it through. And so that's kind of the average that I'll use. Sometimes I'll use a little bit more. Sometimes I'll use about that much in one row, and that's it. That's as much as I use. You can't even see it on my fingers anymore. They're just a little bit shiny. They're definitely a little bit sticky. There's definitely product there. But a little bit of this stuff goes miles with my hair, at least in my experience. With my experience, of course, not every product is gonna work for everybody. Not everybody's experience is gonna be the same. Every once in a while, I will use more than that on a section, just if I'm getting like a little bit frustrated, or maybe if I had washed my hair that day. So if my hair is a little bit more slippery. Sometimes though, I'll use less than that and I'll apply it to each individual section as I go, just kind of depending how I'm doing it that day. Ultimately, the point is that I'm not using a ton of product. I'm actually using barely any at all, and it helps immensely. Using that small amount of product has not caused me to feel any difference. I cannot feel it in my hair. Things don't feel sticky or gross. I really can't notice it at all. And so if you haven't already gathered, I definitely do recommend using a braiding facilitator to help you with your install, especially if you're someone who kind of struggles with braiding, like me, if you're not actually that good at doing braids, if your hands don't really move as fast as you want them to. But of course, if it's not something that you're comfortable with, if you don't like the idea of putting product in your hair and then putting extensions in your hair, then that's totally fine. Personal preference. This is not a do's or do not situations, despite this being a do's or do nots video. But I did want to share this with you guys, my kind of #1 tip for installing, how to make things easier for yourself. I definitely want to hear your guys' opinions on this one. So comment down below, let me know if you install on clean versus dirty hair, if you condition your hair before, if you shampoo your hair before, if you don't do anything to your hair before you install. Do you not use a product? Do you use a product? What product do you use? Let me know. I want to hear your guys' tips for installing. I want to hear your methods. Do you have any do's or do nots? Comment down below. I want to know. Don't forget that you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter. I'll have links in the description, along with my Facebook, Tumblr, YouNow, and Patreon. And feel free to subscribe if you're not already. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye!